The Omega's first heat should have blessed her, but instead it began to kill her. Welcome back, Wild Hearts. Tonight's tale is not for the faint of heart. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to hear is fire, flesh, and fate itself. The forest was heavy that night, silver mist curling between the trees, the air thick with pine and silence. Every breath Alaris took seared her lungs. Heat surged through her body like wildfire, fevered and merciless. Her wolf should have awakened, should have been her strength, but instead, it was tearing her apart from within. Her legs shook as she stumbled forward, vision blurring. With each step, her essence seemed to bleed away, her wolf energy draining until she could scarcely feel its presence. She pressed a trembling hand against the bark of a tree, nails scraping deep grooves, but her body betrayed her. A strangled sound broke past her lips. "Not like this," she gasped, her voice raw. "I don't want to die like this." Her knees buckled. Darkness swirled at the edges of her vision. The world tilted, and she collapsed onto the cold earth. A shadow moved. Heavy boots pressed against the soil, steady, unhurried. A presence swept over her like a storm rolling through the woods. Garrick, the Alpha King. The sharp scent of him hit first, power and iron will, wild and unrestrained. Strong arms lifted her as though she weighed nothing. Her head lolled weakly against his chest, and through her haze she felt it, the hard wall of muscle beneath his tunic, the thunderous rhythm of his heartbeat. Through blurred eyes, she caught a glimpse of his face, illuminated by the moon, a jaw carved with merciless strength, black hair falling to his shoulders, eyes of molten gold burning with something fierce, something unyielding. "Please." Her lips parted on a broken whisper. "Don't let me die." The sound that tore from his chest was a growl, low and furious. Not at her, but at fate itself. His voice rumbled close to her ear. "I won't." The forest faded as he carried her deeper into the shadows. When her eyes opened again, there was the rough shape of a hut. Timber walls, stone hearth, tucked away from the world. His hidden refuge, where no crown or guard could reach him. He kicked the door open, the scent of old wood smoke rushing out, and carried her inside. He laid her gently upon furs spread across the floor. Her body arched in agony, heat racking her frame. She clawed at the fabric beneath her, nails tearing it, a sob breaking past her throat. "It hurts," she whimpered, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "It hurts so much." Garrick knelt at her side, his hand pressed to her damp forehead, broad, calloused, yet impossibly gentle. For a man feared across kingdoms, his touch was reverent, almost trembling. "Your first heat should not be killing you," he said, voice low, tight with fury. His gaze softened, but his tone cut like steel. "Your body is burning itself alive because you've never been claimed." The word struck her like a brand. Virgin. Untouched. Unwanted. Shame burned hotter than the fever. Her chest heaved as she turned her face away, tears clinging to her lashes. Then let me die," she whispered, her voice breaking. His hand snapped to her chin, forcing her to look at him. His golden eyes blazed, molten fire in the shadows. "No." The word slammed through the hut like a decree, sharp, final. "I will not let you fade, not here, not like this." Another wave of heat raked her body and she sobbed, trembling beneath him. "Then help me, please." Silence coiled between them, charged and dangerous. His chest rose and fell, each breath drawn with restraint that shook his massive frame. He leaned closer, voice guttural, thick with warning. "You don't understand what you're asking me, little Omega. If I take you now, you'll never belong to another." Her lashes fluttered. Weak, desperate, but resolute, she met his gaze. "Then let me belong to you." The fire snapped, casting his face in gold and shadow. His hands trembled as he hovered above her, the predator and the man warring in his eyes. His voice dropped, dark and faded, a vow that sealed her destiny. Then so be it. Tonight, you are mine. Her sharp intake of breath was the last sound before the night cut to black, leaving only the pounding of two hearts and the promise of flames that would consume them both. Garrick hovered above her, his massive frame trembling with restraint. Every breath he drew was ragged, as though her scent was a weapon cutting through his self-control. He wanted to deny it, to resist the pull of instinct, but Alaris's body writhed beneath him, her heat tearing her apart, and he knew that without him, she would not last the night. Her voice broke in the darkness. "Please, Garrick, don't let me die." The sound of his name on her lips destroyed the last of his hesitation. With a guttural growl, he surrendered, not as a conqueror, but as the savior she had begged for. When he touched her, she arched as if fire had met storm. Her cry echoed through the hut, raw, unrestrained. Shame streaked her cheeks in tears, but need blazed brighter. Garrick steadied her with words gritted out between clenched teeth. "Breathe, little one. I've got you." The walls seemed to shake with every movement. The crackle of firelight painted their shadows across rough timber, her slender frame caught against his unyielding strength. She clutched at him, not to push him away, but to hold on, to anchor herself as the storm of her heat devoured her. Her whimpers tangled with his low groans, the two sounds entwining like a vow. Every thrust of his power was met with her sobbing surrender, each moment pushing her closer to the edge between agony and ecstasy. "Garrick," she gasped, half plea, half confession. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he growled, pressing his forehead against hers, his breath hot and uneven. "You are stronger than you know. I won't let you break." Her body answered before her lips could. The fire that had been consuming her from within flared, then shifted, no longer devouring but igniting. What had been pain transformed into release, into wild, trembling life. When it crashed over her, her scream filled the hut, echoing like a hymn to survival. Garrick held her tighter, his grip bruising, his voice breaking into a groan of his own, as if the storm of her heat had dragged him under too. The aftermath was not silence, but the frantic rush of breath. Alaris collapsed against his chest, trembling, her tears damp against his skin. For the first time since her collapse in the forest, her body no longer fought to die. It clung to life. Garrick's voice rumbled low, hoarse but steady. "You're safe now. You will never burn alone again." Her lashes fluttered, her lips parting as though to speak, but no words came, only the sound of her broken, grateful sob against the Alpha King's heart. And in that moment, with her fragile frame curled in his arms, Garrick knew this was no act of mercy. This was a bond forged in fire, one neither of them would ever escape. The fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving only a faint glow that painted the hut in flickering gold and shadow. The storm of their bodies had quieted, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. Alaris lay against Garrick's chest, her breath still uneven, her hair tangled across his skin. Every part of her felt raw, stripped of every shield she had ever worn. Pride, fear, shame. They had all been burned away in the furnace of her first claiming. Only this remained, the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, the weight of his arms holding her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever carried. For a moment, she let herself sink into it. His warmth, his scent, the rough furs beneath them. But then shame returned like a creeping shadow. The memory of her begging, of her cries, of how easily she had surrendered, burned her from the inside out. Her fingers twitched, and with a shaky breath she tried to slip free from his embrace. If she could just move away, hide her face, maybe she could reclaim some part of herself. But before she could, his grip tightened around her waist. A low growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating against her ear. "Don't." Her body went still, her heart slamming against her ribs. She dared to glance up at him. His golden eyes caught the firelight, sharp, unyielding. "You didn't beg for death," he said, voice deep, steady, and impossibly certain. His thumb brushed her cheek, forcing her to hold his gaze. "You begged for me." Remember that." Her lips parted, but no words came. Shame warred with something darker, something hotter, because his words were true. In her desperation, she had not begged for life. She had begged for him. Her breath hitched, her cheeks burning. I wasn't myself." The corner of his mouth curved, not in amusement, but in something darker, hungrier. "You were more yourself than ever, stripped bare, no lies, no masks, just you, mine." The word hit her like a mark branded onto her soul. Mine. She trembled. "You make it sound as if I had a choice." "You did," he rumbled. His hand slid slowly down her back, pressing her closer until her trembling body was flush against his. His lips brushed her ear, heat spilling into her skin with every word. "And you chose me." The fire cracked. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, the heat rose again between them. Alaris closed her eyes, her body betraying her shame as it pressed instinctively closer. The ache that had nearly killed her had transformed into something else, something hungry, trembling, alive. Garrick shifted, and the movement drew a soft gasp from her throat. His lips brushed her temple. "There it is," he murmured. "The truth your body can't hide." She wanted to protest, to deny it, but the words tangled in her throat. All she could do was cling to him as the fire in her blood flared hotter. This time, there was no desperation in her pleas, no fear of death driving her cries. It was want, raw, wild, unrelenting. Their second night burned hotter than the first. Her whimpers filled the hut, echoing off the timber walls, tangled with his low growls and ragged breaths. He moved with the same dominance as before, but slower, more deliberate, as though teaching her something she had never known before, that surrender could be pleasure, not pain. Every movement seared her with new intensity. Every whispered word branded her deeper. "You are mine, Alaris. You are not weak. I will break every chain that ever told you otherwise." Her body answered him, trembling, writhing, surrendering. And in that surrender she felt her wolf stir, alive again, howling in the depths of her soul. When release finally came, it was not like falling into fire. It was like being consumed by it, claimed and remade in its blaze. Her cry filled the hut, her nails digging into Garrick's skin, as though holding on to the very man who had pulled her back from death. And he, the Alpha King feared by all, buried his face against her throat and groaned her name as if it were the only word that mattered. In the silence that followed, he didn't let her slip away. His arms caged her against his chest, his breath warm against her skin. "You will never run from me," he murmured, his voice a vow. "Not in shame, not in fear. You are mine. And tomorrow, the world will know it too." Alaris closed her eyes, her heart hammering. Tomorrow was still a mystery, but tonight she belonged to him, and nothing could break the fire they had ignited together. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the cracks in the hut's timber walls, brushing Alaris's pale skin with strokes of silver. She stirred against Garrick's chest, the weight of exhaustion heavy in her limbs, though the fire inside her had quieted. For the first time since her collapse in the forest, she felt something unfamiliar, alive. Her lashes fluttered as she woke to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. His arms were still around her, unyielding, protective, as though he had not slept at all, but kept watch through the night. The thought stirred a strange warmth low in her chest, though it was quickly chased by shame. She had begged him, surrendered to him, clung to him in ways she could not even bear to remember without blushing. She shifted, trying to put distance between them, but Garrick's hand moved instantly, pressing her closer. "Still trying to run?" His voice was rough with fatigue but edged with quiet authority. "You won't win." Her cheeks burned. "I wasn't. You were." His golden eyes fixed on hers, pinning her as surely as his arms. "And you'll stop." Before she could argue, he stood, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. She startled, clutching at his shoulders, but he ignored her protest and carried her across the hut. On a low wooden table sat a loaf of bread, dried meat, and a flask of water. He set her gently on his lap, one arm anchoring her against him as he tore off a piece of bread and brought it to her lips. "I can feed myself," she whispered. "I know," he said, his mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But I'll feed you anyway." Reluctantly, she opened her mouth, and he pressed the morsel past her lips. His gaze never left her face as she chewed, the gold of his eyes softening with something she couldn't name. He gave her water next, the rim of the flask brushing her lower lip, his thumb catching the stray droplet that slipped down her chin. The touch was simple, and yet her heart stuttered as if he had claimed her all over again. When she had eaten her fill, Garrick shifted, pulling a clean tunic from a chest in the corner. He draped it over her trembling form, his large hand smoothing the fabric down her shoulders, his knuckles brushing her skin with deliberate care. "There," he murmured. "No shame, no cold." She swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "Why are you—" "Because you're mine," he cut in, his tone sharp but his gaze impossibly tender. "And mine will never go hungry, never freeze, never doubt their worth." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The words settled deep into her, heavier than chains, warmer than fire. And then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like before. It wasn't driven by desperation, by the savage fire of her first heat. It was slow, deliberate. His lips moved over hers with patience, reverence, as if he had all the time in the world to teach her what it meant to be touched without fear. Her body softened, her hands sliding up to clutch at his tunic. When his tongue brushed hers, a broken moan slipped free, soft, startled, and wholly unguarded. He swallowed it with a low growl. Garrick laid her back on the furs, his body covering hers with lethal grace. But this time he didn't rush. His mouth traced a slow path along her jaw, her throat, the curve of her shoulder. Each kiss lingered, each touch deliberate, as though he worshipped rather than claimed. Alaris trembled, her breath catching. "Garrick." "What are you doing?" "Showing you," he murmured against her skin, his voice dark and reverent, "that this is more than survival." When he entered her again, it was nothing like before. His pace was slow, torturous, each movement sending waves through her that built higher and higher. She arched, gasping, the sound of her moans filling the hut like music. This time, they weren't cries of pain or shame. They were cries of pleasure, raw and unrestrained. Her nails dug into his back, her body rising to meet him without hesitation. Each thrust, each brush of his lips against her ear, unraveled her further until she was shaking apart beneath him. He held her gaze the entire time, watching her fall apart with a reverence that stole her breath. His golden eyes burned into her as he whispered, "Beautiful, mine, perfect." The fire inside her, once cruel, now burned with ecstasy. When she broke, she cried his name, her voice ringing with pleasure so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. And Garrick followed her, his groan ragged, his arms tightening as though he would fuse her body to his. They collapsed together onto the furs, breathless, trembling. Alaris pressed her face into his chest, overwhelmed, unable to look at him, but Garrick tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Do you see it now?" he asked softly. "That intimacy is not a curse? That with me, it is more than survival?" Her lips trembled. Her voice was faint, but the truth slipped free. "Yes." His mouth brushed hers again, slow and claiming. "Good," he whispered. "Then remember this night, little Omega. Remember it was the first time you truly lived." The firelight glowed softer now, licking shadows across the walls of the hut. Alaris lay draped against Garrick, her chest still rising too quickly, her body weak, but alive. For the first time in days, she felt the faintest echo of something inside her that she thought she had lost forever. Her wolf. It was subtle at first, a faint pulse beneath her skin, a whisper in the hollow of her soul. The beast within stirred, restless, fragile, but alive. Her wolf had been dying, torn apart by the unclaimed heat that had nearly consumed her. Now it breathed again, and she couldn't tell if it was because of him or because of them. She lifted her eyes, meeting Garrick's golden gaze where he loomed above her, his chest heaving, his hair damp with sweat and clinging to his temples. He looked less like a king and more like a creature carved by the gods, untamed, immense, dangerous. Her lips parted, her voice hoarse. "Was it you?" she whispered. "Did you bring her back? Or..." Her throat worked. "Or is she yours now?" For a moment, silence fell between them. Then Garrick leaned down, his breath brushing her cheek, his voice a low growl. "She was never dying," he murmured. "She was waiting for me." His words struck her harder than any touch. Her body trembled beneath him, her heart pounding. The heat inside her flared again, not with pain but with wild hunger. And then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was not reverent this time. It was savage, consuming, as if to prove his words with every drag of his lips, every press of his body. His hands gripped her with relentless certainty, and when he moved against her, she felt it. Her wolf surging upward, clawing into the light, howling through her veins. Alaris gasped, her back arching, nails digging into his shoulders. The world blurred, heat rising not only in her flesh but in her soul. She heard it, her wolf's cry, fierce and alive, echoing in her mind. For the first time since the fire of her heat began, she felt whole. "Garrick," she moaned, her voice shaking, torn between fear and awe. She's awake. I told you." His voice was guttural, his pace unrelenting. "You were never weak. You only needed someone who saw you." Her tears spilled freely, not from shame, but from release, from rebirth. She clung to him, her cries mingling with the feral sound of his growls as he drove her further into the storm of her awakening. When she shattered, it wasn't like falling into fire. It was like breaking into light. Her wolf roared inside her, and the sound escaped her lips in a cry so fierce it filled the hut, echoing with primal power. Garrick followed, burying his face against her throat as his own groan tore free, the sound of a man surrendering completely. When it was over, she collapsed against him, trembling, her breath shallow. But inside her wolf was alive again, prowling through her soul with strength she hadn't felt since her mother's lullabies. She turned her face toward Garrick's chest, her voice a broken whisper. You gave her back to me." His hand cradled the back of her head, his lips pressing to her hair. His voice was rough, reverent. "No, little Omega. I only reminded her who she belongs to." Her heart thudded painfully. His words should have terrified her. Instead, they chained her deeper, binding her to him in a way she could no longer deny. And as she closed her eyes, one thought seared through her. It was no longer just her wolf's strength, it was his. Theirs. A bond unbroken. The fire burned low, casting amber light across the hut. Its warmth clung to the air, but Alaris still shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of Garrick's gaze. He sat close beside her, his massive frame wrapped in shadow and flame, every line of his body drawn taut with something he hadn't yet spoken. She traced the fur beneath her fingertips, avoiding his eyes. The silence stretched, thick and almost unbearable, until he finally broke it. "I built this hut," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its usual command, "to escape." Her head turned, eyes searching his face. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the fire, as if it held the ghosts of his past. "From what?" she whispered. He dragged in a slow breath, golden eyes flicking toward her at last. "From everything. From the crown. From war. From the weight of being Alpha King. Here I could breathe. Here I could be nothing." He reached out, his hand closing over hers, dwarfing her slender fingers in his grip. His voice dropped, deep and unsteady. But I never thought it would be here I found my mate. The words slammed into her chest like a strike. Her breath hitched, her pulse fluttering wildly. Mate? He had said it without hesitation, as if it were not a choice but a truth carved into stone. Her lips parted, trembling. Garrick. Before she could speak more, he leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. His touch was not fierce this time. It was tender, reverent, as though afraid she might vanish if he held her too hard. You are mine, Alaris, he whispered, his breath hot against her lips. Not because the heat demanded it, not because I saved you, but because my soul recognized yours, and every moment I touch you is proof that you belong to me. Her heart stuttered, her wolf inside her howling in answer. The bond between them pulled tight, humming like a live wire. She felt it in her chest, in her blood, in the way her body leaned helplessly toward his. Then his mouth claimed hers. The kiss was different than before, slower, deeper, burning with devotion instead of desperation. His lips moved over hers with maddening patience, his tongue stroking hers until she was trembling, moaning into his mouth. He guided her back onto the furs, his body covering hers with lethal grace. But this time, there was no rush, no frantic pace. His mouth trailed down her jaw, across her throat, lingering at her pulse, as if he could taste the life he had saved. She gasped, clutching at his shoulders. Garrick, please. His chuckle was low, dark but tender. Please what, little Omega? His lips brushed her ear, sending shivers racing down her spine. Tell me, beg me, I want to hear your truth. Her body arched against him, need clawing at her. I want you, all of you. He growled softly, the sound vibrating through her chest. You already have me. And then he gave himself to her. Slow, consuming, each movement deliberate, as though he was writing his vow into her very soul. He didn't just take her, he worshipped her. His lips pressed to every inch of her skin, his hands cradling her as though she were both fragile glass and unyielding flame. Her cries filled the hut, no longer broken, no longer ashamed. They were cries of pleasure, pure and unrestrained, spilling from her lips like confessions. Garrick's name tore from her throat again and again, each time answered by his growl of possession. The hut was steeped in silence, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire and the steady cadence of Garrick's breathing. Alaris lay against his chest, her cheek pressed to the hard rise of muscle, her body still trembling from the night before. She should have felt at peace, but the heaviness inside her refused to lift. Her fingers twisted nervously into the furs. Shame gnawed at her, sharp and unyielding. Every sound she had made, every cry and plea played in her mind like echoes she could not silence. And beneath it all was the memory of whispers from her youth. Cruel voices that told her intimacy was punishment, that surrender was weakness, that her first time would be nothing but a curse. Her throat tightened. She drew in a shallow breath and whispered, almost too quietly to be heard, I thought it would feel like ruin. Garrick's head shifted. His golden eyes snapped open, burning into her sharp and unrelenting. Alaris's voice cracked as she forced the words out. I thought my first time would be punishment, a curse, something that would strip me, shame me, and leave me empty. Her lashes lowered, tears threatening to spill. And yet, you... Her voice broke. You made it feel like I'm alive. For a long moment, Garrick said nothing. Then he moved, slow and deliberate, rolling her beneath him. His massive frame caged her against the furs, but his gaze softened, molten with something she had never seen in the eyes of any alpha before. Reverence. His lips brushed against her throat, sending shivers down her spine. When he spoke, his voice was low, guttural, edged with unyielding certainty. It's salvation, Alaris, and it's ours. Her breath stuttered, her body arching instinctively beneath him. The tears she had held back slipped free, streaking down her cheeks. Garrick caught one with his thumb, dragging it slowly away before lowering his mouth to hers. The kiss was raw, hungry, but not rushed. His lips demanded surrender, yet gave her tenderness in equal measure. When she gasped into him, he swallowed the sound, groaning deep in his chest as though her voice was the only fuel he craved. He trailed his mouth along her jaw, down to her throat, lingering there as if to brand the truth into her skin. "Never again will you call it a curse," he whispered against her pulse. "Not every time I touch you, it is proof you are mine." His hand slid down her body, reverent, unhurried, as though learning her all over again. She shivered, her hands fisting into his shoulders as heat coiled low and sharp. "Garrick," she whimpered, shame and need colliding in her voice. "Say it," he growled softly, his lips brushing the hollow of her throat. "Say you are not ashamed." Her chest heaved, her wolf inside her clawing to the surface, urging her to speak. Tears clung to her lashes as she whispered, "I'm not ashamed. Not with you." The sound he made was half growl, half groan, feral and reverent, and then he joined with her. This time it was not frantic, not born of survival or even confession. It was slow, deliberate. Each movement was a vow, each breath a claim. He thrust into her with consuming patience, his pace unyielding and torturous, pulling soft cries from her lips again and again. Her moans filled the hut, echoing off the timber walls, mingling with his guttural growls. She writhed beneath him, trembling, her hands dragging across his back as though to brand him in return. "Look at me," Garrick ordered, his voice a rough command. She forced her eyes open, meeting his gaze. His golden irises burned molten, holding her captive. "Do you see?" he said, voice breaking with the weight of his own need. "This isn't punishment. This isn't curse. This is salvation. Yours, mine, ours." Her lips parted, a sob breaking into a moan as her body convulsed with release. She screamed his name, her voice shattering in the stillness, while her wolf howled inside her with fierce joy. Garrick groaned, burying his face in her neck as his own climax tore through him, his grip bruising, unrelenting, as though he could fuse her body to his. When the storm ebbed, he collapsed against her, their bodies tangled, breaths ragged and desperate. He pressed his lips to her temple, whispering against her damp skin, "Never again will you think of it as shame. Not while I breathe, not while I live. Every time you remember, you will remember this, your pleasure, your strength, your fire, and you will know it belongs only to us." Ilaris's tears finally stilled. She clung to him, not in weakness, but in acceptance. For the first time, her shame shattered, and in its place rose something new. Devotion. The night pressed heavy against the hut, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the forest was hushed, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Inside, Ilaris's chest rose and fell too quickly, her skin flushed, her heart thrumming like a trapped bird. She had thought the heat would consume her once and never relent, but now it came in waves, fierce, demanding, impossible to ignore. Every time Garrick touched her, it ignited again, but this time there was no fear in the fire, only hunger. Her hunger. She turned to him where he sat propped against the firs, his massive frame limned in gold light. Garrick's eyes, sharp and molten, tracked her every breath. He was watching her, not as a king watches his subject, not even as a predator stalks prey, but as a man barely holding on to control. Her wolf stirred inside her, bold, insistent. Ilaris shifted, mounting him before he could move. His eyes widened, his breath catching, but he didn't stop her. Her trembling hand slid up his chest across hard muscle until they fisted into his tunic. She tugged him down to her, her lips crashing against his with a desperation that was entirely her own. Garrick groaned into her mouth, the sound deep, primal, vibrating through her body. His hands clamped onto her hips, steadying her as she pressed harder against him. She kissed him hungrily, recklessly, her tongue sweeping against his, swallowing the growl that ripped free from his throat. When she finally tore her mouth from his, her breath came fast and unsteady. "I need you," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush, raw and unpolished. "Not because I'll die without you, but because I want you." The Alpha King's golden eyes burned, his jaw tightening as if her words had undone him completely. His voice was rough, breaking at the edges. "Careful, little Omega. You'll break me before I break you." Her pulse fluttered wildly. The idea that she could undo him, that she could bring this powerful man to his knees, made her body ache with new hunger. Her wolf howled inside her, fierce and proud. Ilaris rolled her hips against him, and his groan was torn from deep in his chest. His head fell back against the wall, his grip on her tightening until she gasped. "You're playing with fire," he growled, his voice low and strained. She leaned forward, her lips brushing the shell of his ear. "Then burn with me." That was all it took. With a guttural snarl, Garrick seized her, flipping her beneath him in one motion. But this time, her hands clung to him, pulling him down closer, demanding him, not yielding blindly. She wrapped herself around him with a confidence that shocked even her body begging him in ways her lips had only just learned to admit. Their mouths collided again, teeth clashing, tongues tangling, a battle as much as a kiss. Every movement was raw, unrestrained, their sounds filling the hut like music, her gasps, his growls, the frantic rustle of furs beneath them. Garrick drove into her with force, but his rhythm was guided by her now, her legs pulling him closer, her hands dragging down his back, urging him faster, harder. She met him with equal hunger, her cries breaking into sobs of pleasure. "Ilaris," he groaned, his voice rough with desperation. "You'll undo me." Her answer was a moan of his name, her head thrown back, her body trembling beneath him as waves of sensation tore through her. The fire in the hearth roared higher, sparks flying as though the very air responded to the feral passion between them. Ilaris felt her wolf rising, pushing against her skin, her soul flooding with power. Her climax came sudden and violent, crashing through her like lightning. She screamed, nails clawing his back, her wolf's cry echoing in her mind. Garrick followed her instantly, his roar filling the hut, his body shuddering with release as though she had pulled the very strength from him. When it was over, he collapsed against her, his breath ragged, his weight pressing her into the furs. His voice, hoarse and raw, brushed her ear. "You think you're fragile, but you're the only one who's ever brought me to my knees." Her heart clenched, her body still trembling. She turned her face into his chest, whispering softly, "Then I'll never let you stand without me." And as the fire dimmed and their bodies lay tangled, Ilaris realized something had shifted. This was no longer about survival, no longer about saving her from death. This was about hunger, choice, and the terrifying, beautiful truth that she could claim him just as he claimed her. The night was cool, the air sharp with pine and earth. The forest spread endlessly around them, ancient and silent, except for the crunch of Garrick's boots against the soil. Ilaris clung to his arm, her body wrapped in one of his furs, her hair loose and wild around her shoulders. She had not left the hut since the night her world shattered. Now, with the Alpha King at her side, every step felt like stepping into another life. "Why bring me here?" she asked softly, her voice fragile in the vastness of the dark. His golden eyes caught the silver sheen of moonlight. "Because you must know my world is not only walls and shadows. It is the hunt, the wild, the moon." He paused, gaze never leaving hers. "And now, it is you." Her heart clenched, her wolf stirring inside her, restless. She tilted her head back, gazing at the full moon suspended above the treetops. Its light spilled across her skin like silver fire. Then it struck, sudden, violent. The heat, it tore through her veins, clawing into her body, forcing a cry from her lips. She stumbled, clutching her chest, her knees weakening. "Garrick!" He caught her instantly, arms wrapping around her before she could fall. His nostrils flared as her scent enveloped him, thick and intoxicating. His growl rumbled through the forest, echoing off the trees like thunder. "Your body calls to me again," he said, his voice low, rough, already breaking with restraint. The forest itself can hear it. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her skin burning as though set aflame. Shame prickled at her, being struck like this in the open, beneath the watchful moon. But Garrick silenced her with a hand against her cheek, his golden gaze fierce. "Don't hide from me, Alaris. Don't hide from her." He lifted his chin toward the sky. "The moon gave us this bond. Let her bear witness." Her lips trembled. "Here, in the open?" His mouth curved in a dark, hungry smile. "Yes, here, where wolves belong." Before she could protest again, his mouth claimed hers, hard and consuming. The kiss stole her breath, scattering her shame like leaves in the wind. His hands dragged her against him, pinning her to the rough bark of a tree, her back arching under the pressure. She gasped against his lips, the shock of bark against her skin mingling with the fire building within her. Her whimpers echoed through the clearing, swallowed by the sound of his growls. "Mine," he rasped, pressing his forehead to hers. "Every cry, every breath, mine." Her wolf surged inside her, howling in answer. The forest seemed to pulse with it, the trees groaning, the air thickening, the moonlight blazing brighter. When he entered her, it was raw and unrestrained. The tree at her back shook with every thrust, the earth itself seeming to tremble beneath them. Her hands clawed into his shoulders, her head thrown back as her moans filled the night. Garrick's teeth grazed her throat, his growl vibrating against her skin. "The moon sees you," he said, his voice dark with possession. "She knows you are mine." Alaris cried out, her body breaking under the force of it, pleasure and power colliding until she thought she would shatter. Her wolf howled in her chest, spilling into the night in a cry that tore from her lips. Her climax struck like lightning, violent and consuming. She screamed his name, the sound echoing into the forest, mingling with the primal cry of her wolf. Garrick followed, his roar reverberating through the trees, his arms crushing her against him as though he would fuse her body to his. For a moment the entire forest held still. Only their panting breaths and the whisper of leaves remained. When the storm passed, Garrick lifted her chin, forcing her tear-streaked gaze to meet his. His eyes burned with fire and reverence, golden in the moonlight. "Now the world knows," he whispered. "Even the moon herself. You are not fragile, Alaris. You are mine. My equal. My mate." Her heart clenched. Her wolf purred inside her, and for the first time she did not flinch from the truth. She embraced it. Beneath the endless night, pressed against the ancient tree, she knew. She was no longer the Omega who had stumbled into the forest to die. She was the Alpha's mate, marked not only by his touch but by the moon herself. The forest was still humming from their wildness. The scent of pine, earth, and smoke lingered in the air as Garrick carried Alaris back to the hut, her body draped against his chest. The moon had watched them. The trees had heard their cries, and something inside her had changed forever. He laid her gently onto the furs, but instead of covering her, he stood over her, golden eyes burning as though fire itself lived inside them. His jaw was set, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what he had yet to say. Alaris's lashes fluttered as she looked up at him, her lips parted, her body trembling not from weakness now but from the memory of what they had just done. Shame did not reach her anymore, only hunger, only him. But Garrick's silence unsettled her. She pushed herself up onto trembling elbows. "Why are you looking at me like that?" His voice came low, deep, steady, each word like a brand against her skin. "Because I can't keep you here any longer. Because the world must know what I already do, that you are mine." Her breath caught. Her wolf stirred inside her chest, restless and alive. "Garrick," he cut her off, his voice rough, dangerous. "I will not keep you hidden like a secret I'm ashamed of. You are not shame, Alaris. You are not burden. You are my mate. and I will burn my kingdom to ash before I ever hide you away again." Her heart slammed against her ribs. His words struck her harder than any claiming, sharper than any touch. She had always believed she was something to be tucked away, an omega destined to be invisible. Yet here was the Alpha King, vowing before fire and moon to raise her above all others. Tears welled in her eyes, but Garrick crossed the space between them before they could fall. He cupped her face in both hands, his golden gaze searing her. "You are mine," he growled softly, almost brokenly. "Not because you begged me, not because your heat demanded it, but because every part of me knows I cannot live without you. Every battle, every crown, every war, none of it matters without you." Her lips trembled. "And if they reject me? If they call me unworthy?" His mouth pressed to hers in a kiss that was both fierce and tender, swallowing her doubt. When he pulled back, his voice shook the walls. "Then they reject me, and I will cut down any who dare." Her tears spilled then, but this time they were not born of shame. They were born of devotion, of awe, of the terrifying love that bound her soul to his. Their mouths collided again, and the kiss spiraled into hunger, their bodies pressed together with the urgency of two beings who knew they belonged only to each other. Garrick laid her back onto the furs, his lips tracing fire down her throat, across her shoulder, each kiss like a vow pressed into her skin. Their joining that night was unlike any before. It was not desperation, not survival, not even shame turned to salvation. It was declaration. It was coronation. Each thrust was not only passion, it was proof. Each cry of her name from his lips was a vow. Each moan that tore from her throat was an answer. "Mine," he whispered against her ear. "Yours," she gasped in reply. "Forever," he groaned, his body trembling with devotion. When release came, it was not silent. It was an anthem. She screamed his name, her wolf howling inside her in perfect harmony, while Garrick roared as though claiming not just her body but the world itself. The fire roared in the hearth as if echoing their flames, sparks leaping toward the ceiling. Garrick collapsed against her, his chest heaving, his lips pressed to her temple. "You are my vow," he whispered hoarsely. "You are my kingdom." And in that moment, tangled in his arms, Alaris realized this was more than passion, more than heat. This was a coronation written in flesh and fire, binding not only their bodies, but their reign. The fire had burned low, its glow faint against the rough timber walls. The hut was quiet except for the rustle of furs and the sound of Garrick's steady breathing. Alaris lay beside him, her body sore, her heart thrumming with restless energy. She should have been spent, but something inside her was shifting, something she could no longer ignore. She turned her head, studying him in the flickering light. Garrick's chest rose and fell with slow control, his golden eyes half-lidded but watchful, always watchful. He was the Alpha King, the strongest man she had ever known. Yet with her, he gave gentleness, devotion, and fire. And for the first time, she wanted to give something back. Her wolf stirred, urging her forward. Alaris's hand pressed against his chest, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath her palm. Her body trembled, nerves rioting inside her, but she pushed past it. Slowly, carefully, she shifted, sliding over him until she was mounting his hips. His eyes snapped open fully, molten gold locking onto her with fierce intensity. His breath caught, but he did not move. He did not stop her. Alaris's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her ribs. Her hands pressed to his chest, her body shaking as she leaned over him. Shame flickered at the edges of her mind. What if she was clumsy? What if she looked foolish? But then Garrick's hands came to rest lightly on her thighs, not guiding, not controlling, only grounding. His voice was low, husky, and reverent. "That's it," he murmured, his gaze never leaving hers. "Show me your strength. Show me you're alive." Her lips parted, her breath trembling. His words ignited her, pushing away the doubt. She pressed down, slowly, tentatively, and his answering groan shook her to her core. The sound of the Alpha King, undone beneath her. It gave her courage. She moved again, this time with more certainty, and Garrick's head fell back against the furs, his throat exposed, his hands tightening against her skin. A guttural growl tore from his chest, raw and primal, echoing off the walls. "Ilaris," he groaned, his voice ragged, desperate. "You'll unmake me." A rush of pride filled her, hot and sharp. For so long she had thought herself weak, fragile, cursed. Yet here she was, bringing the Alpha King to ruin with nothing but her own will. She leaned forward, her hair spilling across his chest, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Then let me." His answering growl was broken, worshipful. His hands gripped her tighter, but still he let her lead. Her rhythm grew bolder, her moans louder, her body moving with instinct and hunger. Garrick's praises spilled into the air, rough between his groans. "Beautiful. Strong. My queen." Each word struck her deeper than any touch. Each declaration burned away the last of her shame, replacing it with fire and pride. Her wolf howled inside her, fierce and triumphant, as she rode the waves of sensation, her body trembling but unyielding. Garrick's groans rose with her cries, the two sounds entwining like a song only they could make. When release came, it shattered her. She cried out, her body convulsing with pleasure, her wolf's cry echoing in her soul. Garrick followed, roaring her name, his body trembling beneath hers as though she had pulled the very strength from him. They collapsed together, her small frame sprawled across his chest, both of them panting, their hearts racing in perfect rhythm. Garrick's hand cradled the back of her head, his lips brushing her temple. His voice was hoarse, filled with awe. "You're no longer the Omega who begged for survival. You are my fire, my equal, my mate." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not of shame. They were of pride. For the first time she felt alive, not as someone saved, but as someone powerful. And as she drifted against his chest, her wolf still humming with triumph, she knew the truth. She had awakened. The night was sharp with starlight, the forest alive with whispers of wind. Garrick had carried her from the hut once more, and now they stood in a clearing bathed in silver. The moon hung high above them, enormous, unblinking, as though it had come down from the heavens just to watch. Ilaris clutched his hand, her chest heaving, her body restless with hunger that had nothing to do with need alone. It was something deeper, something clawing at her from the inside. Her wolf. She had felt its stirrings before, faint and fragile, but tonight it raged inside her, pushing against her skin, demanding release. "Garrick." Her voice was breathless, trembling. "She's trying to come out." He stepped close, towering over her, his golden eyes glowing like fire in the moonlight. His hands framed her face, steadying her as his voice rumbled low. "Then let her. Don't fight it. Don't cage her. Give her to me." Her body shuddered, torn between fear and ecstasy. She had been told all her life that her wolf was weak, broken, unworthy. But Garrick's gaze burned with truth, not pity. "You are not broken," he growled, his lips brushing her ear. "You are mine, and tonight she will know it too." He claimed her beneath the moon, and the bond that flared between them was not only flesh, it was spirit. Her wolf surged forward, flooding her with power. Her eyes flickered silver, her breath came ragged, and then it happened. The howl. It tore from her throat, sharp and fierce, a sound she had never been able to summon. It split the night, echoing across the clearing, shaking the trees, filling the air with primal triumph. Garrick froze for an instant, awe flashing across his face. Then he groaned, pressing harder against her, his own growl joining hers, deep and thunderous. Their sounds mingled, her howl, his growl, a symphony of beast and man, of alpha and mate. Ilaris's body writhed, her moans breaking into cries that no longer sounded like shame. They sounded like freedom. Her wolf reveled in the bond, in the strength, in the way Garrick's power didn't cage her but unleashed her. He held her tight, his voice rough between groans. Yes, let her sing. Let her claim me as I claim you. Her body broke with release, her howl peaking into a scream of pleasure as her wolf spilled into the night, stronger than ever before. Garrick followed her, his roar tearing through the forest, echoing against the trees until it felt as if the whole world bowed to their union. They collapsed together in the clearing, her body trembling, her wolf purring within her like a living flame. The moonlight wrapped them both, silver fire kissing their skin. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed her face into Garrick's chest, whispering, "She's alive. She's really alive." His hand cradled the back of her head, his lips pressing reverently to her hair. His voice was hoarse, but steady, fierce. She was always alive. She was only waiting for me to hear her howl. The moon glowed brighter as if in answer. The forest hushed, and Alaris knew the truth. This was not just a union of man and woman. It was beast and beast, flesh and soul, bound beneath the eternal gaze of the moon. And with Garrick's arms around her, she knew she would never silence her wolf again. The clearing still shimmered with silver moonlight when Garrick lowered himself onto a fallen log. His massive frame relaxed, but his gaze sharp as fire. He looked every inch a king even here, wild and untamed. The forest itself, his throne room. Alaris stood before him, her hair a dark cascade around her shoulders, her lips still parted from the howl that had torn from her throat. The bond between them thrummed like a live flame, her wolf prowling inside her chest, restless, demanding. Garrick extended a hand, palm up, commanding, yet patient. "Come to me." Her pulse hammered. She stepped forward, then another, until she was standing between his knees. His golden eyes burned into her, their weight heavy enough to pin her where she stood. "Sit," he rumbled, his voice low and guttural. "Take your place." Her breath caught. His lap, his body. The words struck her with heat that made her tremble. But she obeyed. Slowly, cautiously, she swung her leg over him and settled onto his lap. Garrick's sharp inhale was immediate, his jaw flexing, his hands gripping her hips to steady her. Alaris braced her hands against his shoulders, her body quaking, not from fear this time, but from the sheer intensity of what it meant. She was no longer beneath him. She was seated upon him, as if his body itself was her throne. He leaned close, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his voice a growl. "Do you feel it? Do you feel what you've become?" Her lashes fluttered, her wolf howling inside her. She moved, slow at first, testing, her body brushing his with deliberate intent. Garrick's answering groan tore from his chest, rough and unrestrained. The sound sent a bolt of pride through her. Her lips curved into the faintest smile as she whispered, breathless, "You said I was weak." She moved again, bolder this time, her body grinding against him with growing confidence. His head fell back, his throat bared, his grip on her hips tightening as though he were barely holding himself together. Her wolf surged with triumph. She leaned close, her breath hot against his ear, and gasped, "But you're trembling for me." The growl that ripped from Garrick's throat shook the air. His eyes snapped to hers, blazing with molten gold. But this time it was not dominance. It was surrender. "Yes," he groaned, his voice breaking. "For you. Only for you." Her body moved faster now, reckless, hungry, guided by instinct and fire. Garrick let her, his groans filling the clearing, his praises tumbling from his lips. Strong. Powerful. Mine. The rhythm built between them, each movement a claim, each gasp a vow. Alaris's cries grew louder, her body riding the waves of heat with unflinching boldness. Garrick's growls rose to meet them, the sound of a king undone by the woman on his throne. When release struck, it was like fire devouring them both. Alaris screamed his name, her body convulsing as her wolf howled inside her, fierce and victorious. Garrick roared beneath her, his hands gripping her hips as though she were the only anchor he had left in the world. They collapsed together, her small frame pressed against his massive chest, both of them panting, trembling. Garrick buried his face in her hair, his voice hoarse but reverent. "You sit upon me like a queen," he whispered. "And so you are, not weak, not fragile, my equal, my throne." Alaris's heart stuttered, her body still humming with fire. For the first time she smiled without shame, her voice soft but steady. "Then let the world see me as you do." And in the moonlit clearing, seated upon her king, she knew she no longer belonged in the shadows. She belonged at his side, his mate, his queen, his fire, The hut smelled of smoke and pine, the fire low and steady in the hearth. Shadows danced across the walls, catching in Garrick's golden eyes as he leaned back against the firs, watching her. He looked like a king even now, untamed, powerful, a beast caged only by will. But tonight, she wanted to test those chains. Alaris's gaze drifted to the hunting chest in the corner. Inside, coiled neatly, were the leather straps Garrick used when taming beasts in the wild. Her pulse quickened. Her wolf prowled inside her, daring her to reach for them. When she did, his head tilted, curiosity flashing across his face. "Little Omega," he rumbled, his voice a warning and a promise. "Do you know what you hold in your hands?" Her fingers trembled, but she nodded, clutching the straps to her chest. "I want to try." His jaw tightened, his breath deepening, but he did not rise to stop her. "And if you fail?" Her lips curved faintly, courage sparking. "Then I learn. But if I succeed..." Her voice dropped. "You will be mine." The growl that ripped from his chest was guttural, primal, his body shifting with restless need. Yet he spread his arms wide, his voice low and reverent. "Then claim me. Show me your courage." Alaris moved to him, her wolf urging her with every trembling step. She straddled him, her body pressing against his as she looped the first strap around one of his wrists, then the other, binding him against the rough wood frame of the bed. His chest rose sharply, his golden eyes blazing, but he didn't resist. He let her. The Alpha King, feared by all, allowed himself to be bound by a trembling Omega. Her breath shook as she looked at him, chained not by force but by choice. His lips curved into the faintest smile, his teeth flashing in firelight. "You could slay me, little Omega," he whispered through clenched teeth, his voice hoarse with desire. "And I would thank you for it." Her body burned at his words, heat rushing through her veins. She pressed closer, her lips crashing against his, devouring him with hunger she had never dared show. He groaned into her mouth, the sound raw and broken, his bound wrists flexing as though he ached to touch her, but refused to break the chains she had fastened. "You're trembling," she murmured breathlessly, pulling back to search his face. "For you," he rasped, his voice fraying. "Only for you." She began to move, slowly at first, testing her strength, her confidence building with each groan that ripped from his throat. Garrick's head fell back, his jaw clenched, his chest heaving as he let her guide every rhythm, every pace. His growls filled the hut, vibrating through her body, urging her higher, harder. "Strong," he gasped. "Powerful," he groaned. "My queen," he whispered, almost reverent. The words seared into her, branding her deeper than any mark could. Her body writhed with his, her cries spilling freely, no longer timid but fierce, triumphant. She rode the storm of sensation, her wolf howling within her, until her release shattered through her like lightning. Her scream filled the hut, wild and unrestrained, while Garrick roared her name in answer, his body convulsing beneath her, his wrists straining against the straps as though he could no longer bear the chains. When it was over, she collapsed against his chest, trembling, her hair plastered to her damp skin. Garrick's breath came ragged, his golden eyes glazed with awe. "You bound me," he whispered, his voice raw, "and I gave you everything." She looked up at him, her lips curving in a smile both tender and bold. "Then you are mine, Garrick, as much as I am yours." His growl was soft this time, almost like a purr. "Always." And in that moment, with the Alpha King bound beneath her and his surrender laid bare, Alaris knew she had claimed more than his body. She had claimed his soul. The fire roared higher in the hearth as if it sensed what was coming. Shadows leapt across the walls, stretching tall and wild, while the hut seemed to pulse with their breaths. Alaris lay beneath Garrick, her body trembling not with weakness, but with something fierce and overflowing. Her wolf prowled inside her, alive and burning brighter than ever before. The fire that had once devoured her now surged with radiant strength. Her fingers tangled in his dark hair as he kissed down her throat, his mouth leaving trails of heat across her skin. Every press of his lips felt like a vow, every growl from his chest a promise. "Alaris," he groaned, his golden eyes lifting to hers. They glowed with a heat that was more than hunger. It was devotion. "You are no longer dying. You are radiant. You are mine." Her chest rose and fell too quickly, her lips trembling as tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yours." Their bodies moved together, harder, faster, until the hut itself seemed to shudder with the force of it. Furs tangled beneath them, the wooden beams groaning as their cries filled the small space, her moans, his growls, their wolf souls singing in unison. Alaris clutched at him, her body arching as waves of ecstasy built higher and higher, consuming her until she thought she might burst apart. Garrick's hands gripped her tightly, his breath ragged against her ear. "You are everything," he rasped. "My mate, my queen, my fire." The words undid her. Her climax ripped through her with violent force, her scream echoing against the walls as her wolf howled within her. Her body convulsed, her soul alight with flame, every nerve burning with him. Garrick followed instantly, his roar shaking the rafters, his body trembling violently as he poured himself into her, surrendering everything he was. His teeth grazed her throat, hovering there, his breath hot against her skin. And then he bit. The mark was not savage. It was sacred. His teeth sank into the curve of her neck, a searing pain that flared into unimaginable pleasure. Alaris gasped, her eyes flying wide, her wolf howling with triumph as the bond sealed between them. She clung to him, tears streaming freely down her face, her lips whispering his name like prayer. "Garrick." He groaned into her skin, his bite firm, his hands trembling as though he, the Alpha King, could scarcely contain himself. When he finally lifted his head, his lips were stained with her taste, his eyes wild and reverent. "It is done," he growled, his voice breaking. "You are mine, sealed in blood, fire, and soul. No power on this earth can take you from me now." Her tears came harder, but they were not of pain. They were of surrender, of joy so fierce it hurt. She cupped his face in her trembling hands, forcing him to see her as she choked out, "And I am yours. Always." The bond hummed between them, alive and unbreakable. She could feel him inside her mind now, a steady pulse of strength, devotion, and fire. His wolf pressed against hers, no longer separate, but intertwined, one heart beating inside two bodies. They collapsed together, their bodies tangled, the hut still trembling with the echoes of their joining. Garrick's lips pressed to her hair, his voice hoarse, reverent. "Sleep, little Omega, my mate, my queen. Nothing will ever harm you now." And for the first time since her mother's death, Alaris closed her eyes without fear, because she knew. She was no longer dying. She was radiant, overflowing, sealed as the mate of the Alpha King. The storm of their sealing had passed, leaving the hut quiet save for the crackle of embers in the hearth. The furs tangled around them still held the scent of sweat and fire, of moonlight and blood, of the bond that now burned between them. Ilaris stirred, her wolf purring within her, strong and whole at last. She turned, expecting to find Garrick asleep, his great frame sprawled beside her in the ease of dominance. But instead she froze. He was sitting at the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his hands braced on his knees. The firelight painted shadows across his back, and for the first time since she had known him, the Alpha King looked vulnerable. Her breath caught. "Garrick?" He did not move at first, his chest rising and falling too heavily. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. His golden eyes glowed dimmer than usual, softened, almost broken. His voice, when it came, was rough, hushed, stripped bare of power. "You saved me too?" The words slammed into her, more piercing than any vow or growl. She sat up, clutching the furs to her chest, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" His jaw clenched, his gaze dropping again. "All my life I've been king, warrior, alpha, feared, untouchable. But when the crown was heavy, when the battles never ended, I built this hut because I needed somewhere to fall, to break." His breath shuddered. "And yet I never did. I never could. Until you." Tears stung her eyes. She rose, crossing the furs to kneel before him, taking his face in her trembling hands. His skin was hot beneath her palms, his breath ragged against her. "Garrick." His hands covered hers, dwarfing them completely. His eyes rose to hers, wild and reverent. "You saved me from silence, from emptiness, from being nothing but the Alpha King. You reminded me I am a man too. A man who can burn. A man who can need. A man who can love." Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. This giant, this king, this beast of fire and gold, brought low by her. Not with chains, not with cries, but with love. A sob broke from her lips as she pressed her mouth to his, their kiss trembling, wet with tears. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't desperate. It was reverent. When he lowered her onto the furs again, his movements were unhurried, every brush of his lips against her skin an oath. His hands traced her body not with conquest but with devotion, as if memorizing the shape of the soul he now held. Their joining that night was unlike any before. It was not wild. It was not feral. It was sacred. Ilaris moaned softly, her eyes fluttering shut as Garrick's pace moved slow, steady, endlessly consuming, his forehead pressed to hers, their breaths mingling, their wolves humming in unison. "Not just my body," he whispered between groans, his voice breaking, "but my soul. I give it to you." Her tears spilled as she clung to him, her own voice raw and certain. "Then take mine too." Every thrust was an oath, every gasp a vow, every cry a confession. They didn't scream this time. They whispered. They sobbed. They trembled together. When release came, it was not violent. It was transcendent. Ilaris cried out his name, her body shaking, her soul opening like a floodgate as their wolves entwined completely. Garrick groaned, his voice breaking, his body collapsing against hers with reverence, not ferocity. The hut was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was not emptiness. It was peace. He held her close, his lips at her temple, his breath unsteady. "You saved me too," he murmured again, softer this time. Ilaris pressed her face into his chest, tears soaking his skin, her heart so full it ached. "Then let us never save each other halfway, only whole." And as they drifted together into sleep, wrapped in furs and fire, bound in body and soul, the Alpha King and the fragile Omega knew there was no longer either weakness or crown between them. There was only them. The fire in the hearth was furious, flames crackling and spitting as though they, too, hungered for what was about to unfold. Ilaris's breath came fast and shallow as Garrick pressed her against the wooden post of the bed, his mouth devouring hers in a kiss so rough it stole the very air from her lungs. The bond thrummed between them like lightning, each spark of contact setting her skin ablaze. She clawed at his shoulders, moaning into his mouth as he growled, the sound vibrating through her chest. Their wolves snarled and purred in unison, their souls tangled beyond unraveling. "Garrick," she gasped, her voice half plea, half dare. He pulled back just enough for his golden eyes to lock on hers, burning with fire and mischief both. "Do you feel it?" he growled. "This hunger will never end. Not for you." Her lips trembled, her body trembling even more. "Then don't stop. Ever." He laughed then, low and dangerous, the sound curling through her like smoke. And in the next heartbeat he lifted her, carried her, and threw her down onto the furs with a feral grin. She shrieked, not in fear, but in breathless, giddy surprise. Her laugh broke into a moan as he pinned her wrists above her head, his mouth trailing fire down her throat. She writhed beneath him, her wolf howling with every scrape of his teeth, every groan torn from his chest. When she twisted free, it was her turn. She shoved him back, climbing over him, straddling his lap with a fire in her eyes that made him groan. Her hair tumbled forward, brushing his chest as she whispered, "My turn to feast." Garrick's head fell back, his throat bared, his laughter ragged with pleasure. "Careful, little Omega. You'll devour me whole." Her lips brushed his ear, her breath hot against his skin. "Then let me." Their rhythm turned frantic, playful, wild. The hut itself became their battlefield. Against the bedpost atop the table tangled in the furs, their cries and laughter filled the small space, mixing into something primal and intoxicating. Alaris gasped, her body alive with sensation, every nerve aflame. Her moans spilled freely, unashamed, while Garrick's growls shook the air, each one louder, rougher, more desperate than the last. "Stronger," he groaned as she clawed at him. "Mine," she whispered, her voice breaking into a cry. "Always," he roared, his body trembling beneath hers. They devoured each other with love as fierce as lust. Every kiss was a bite, every touch a brand, every movement a vow renewed. The more they gave, the more they needed, their bond turning insatiable, endless. When climax struck, it was not a single storm, but a relentless wave. Alaris screamed his name, her body convulsing with fire, while Garrick's roar shook the very rafters of the hut, his strength surrendering completely to her. They collapsed onto the furs, laughing and gasping, their chests pressed tight, their wolves purring like beasts fed at last. Garrick's hand tangled in her hair, pulling her close as he pressed his forehead to hers. "You'll be the end of me," he whispered, his voice hoarse, reverent. "And I'll die laughing, begging for more." Her smile was shaky but bright, her lips brushing his. "Then let us never stop feasting." And in that night, with every surface of the hut claimed, they learned that passion could be not only survival, not only salvation, but joy. The hut was drenched in silence after their feast of passion, the air heavy with smoke and heat. Alaris lay sprawled across Garrick's chest, her breath slowing, her wolf humming with contentment. But tonight, a new fire stirred inside her. Not the desperate hunger of survival, not the playful spark of mischief, but something sharper. Authority. She lifted her head, her silver eyes locking onto his golden ones. Garrick's arm tightened around her waist instinctively, as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. But she shook her head, pressing her palm against his chest. "Lie back," she whispered. The Alpha King's brows lifted, surprise flashing across his face. For a moment, she thought he might resist. But then his lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. He reclined against the furs, his hands falling open at his sides. "Command me, little Omega," he rumbled. "Show me your strength." Her wolf bristled at the word, and for the first time Alaris did not flinch from it. She climbed atop him, her movements steady, deliberate. No trembling, no shame. Her hands pressed against his chest, pinning him as surely as chains ever could. "Don't move," she said softly, but her voice held steel. His golden eyes flared, molten with hunger, but he obeyed. His massive body stilled beneath her, his breath uneven as he let her guide him. Ilaris leaned down, her hair brushing his face, her lips ghosting over his jaw. "Tonight you don't lead, you follow." A guttural growl tore from Garrick's throat. But it wasn't defiance. It was surrender. His chest heaved beneath her, his hands twitching at his sides as though he burned to touch her but honored her command. She moved against him, slowly, deliberately, building her rhythm with the steady certainty of a queen claiming her throne. Garrick groaned, his head falling back into the furs, his voice breaking into ragged pleas. "Ilaris." "Gods!" Her wolf howled in triumph. She pressed her lips to his ear, her voice breathless but fierce. "Worship me, Garrick." And he did. His mouth traced fire across her throat, her shoulder the curve of her collar, every kiss a prayer, every groan an offering. His words tumbled between his growls, raw and reverent. "Beautiful. Strong. My queen." The sound of it filled her with fire. She took him with unflinching confidence, her cries rising with his groans, their bodies moving together in perfect rhythm. For once he was not the Alpha King towering above her. He was hers, obedient, trembling, undone. "You obey me," she gasped, her nails digging into his chest. "Always," he groaned, his voice hoarse with truth. "Your command is my salvation." Her body convulsed, pleasure ripping through her with violent force. She screamed his name, her climax crashing like a storm, her wolf howling inside her with fierce pride. Garrick followed instantly, roaring into her throat, his body shuddering violently as though she had broken him completely. When the storm ebbed, she collapsed against him, trembling, her breath ragged. Garrick wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, pressing his lips reverently to her hair. "You are no longer an Omega begging for survival," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. "You are my queen, my command, my soul." Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they were not of shame. They were of power, of pride, of the truth she had finally embraced. She had not only survived, she had risen, and as she lay against her king, her body still humming with fire, she knew she was not only his mate, she was his equal. The night was suffused with firelight, the hut a cocoon of shadows and heat. The air was thick with their scent, heavy with the bond that pulsed like a second heartbeat between them. Ilaris lay beneath Garrick, her skin damp, her breath trembling, her wolf restless and wild. But there was no weakness in her now, only hunger, endless hunger. He kissed her mouth with consuming force, growling low in his chest as though he couldn't bear a single moment of distance. She clung to him, her nails raking across his shoulders, her moans spilling freely into the crackling silence. "Again," she gasped, her voice breaking with need. "Don't stop, Garrick." He pulled back just far enough for her to see his golden eyes, glowing like molten fire. His chest heaved, his jaw flexing, his breath hot against her cheek. "Do you feel it?" he rasped. "This hunger will never end." Her tears burned as she nodded, her body trembling. "Then feed it. Always." With a guttural growl, he obeyed. His body crashed against hers, their rhythm brutal and consuming, yet threaded with reverence in every kiss, every groan, every whispered vow. The furs tangled beneath them, the bedposts groaned. The very hut shuddered as though unable to contain the storm of their bond. Ilaris cried out his name again and again, each sound swallowed by his lips, each plea answered by his growls. She felt him everywhere, his strength, his heat, his soul wrapping her in fire until she could no longer tell where she ended and he began. Their wolves howled in unison inside them, wild and triumphant, clawing through their souls, binding them tighter with every thrust, every gasp, every shared cry. The world beyond the hut ceased to exist. There was only the fire. At the peak of it, Garrick pressed his forehead against hers, his voice breaking with devotion. "Even if the world burns, I'll keep you in this fire with me." Her sob tore free, her lips trembling as she gasped. Then let it burn. Pleasure ripped through her, violent and unstoppable, her body convulsing as her wolf screamed into the night. Garrick roared in answer, his body trembling, his strength surrendering to her completely as he shattered with her. They collapsed together, their bodies tangled, sweat and tears mingling, the air thick with smoke and desire. Neither moved, neither spoke at first, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding in unison. Finally, Garrick brushed his lips against her temple, his voice raw, reverent. Eternal. That's what this is. Eternal heat. Eternal bond. Her fingers curled against his chest, her voice soft but fierce. Then I am yours in every fire, in every lifetime. The flames in the hearth leapt higher, as if sealing their vow, casting them in light like two souls forged in the heart of a burning world. And wrapped in his arms, her wolf purring within her, Ilaris knew the truth. Their fire would never die. The gates of the kingdom yawned open, iron and stone trembling as the Alpha King returned. Garrick rode at the front, his wolf-black cloak billowing behind him like storm clouds, his golden eyes fierce with a light the people had never seen before. And behind him, astride the same great horse, clung Ilaris, the Omega who had once collapsed in the forest, broken, dying, now radiant, silver-eyed, her wolf alive and howling within her. The pack gasped, whispers breaking like waves as they saw her pressed against their king's back, his hand resting firmly over hers where it wrapped his chest, as if to show them all that he would never ride without her again. They dismounted at the great hall, the pack already gathering in swells, eyes wide, expectant. Garrick did not wait for ceremony. He seized her hand and pulled her forward, his towering frame casting long shadows across the marble steps. When he stopped, the air itself seemed to still. Thousands of eyes locked on them. Garrick's voice, rough and thunderous, rolled across the crowd. She was dying, he declared, his gaze sweeping his pack, daring anyone to look away. He tugged her against him, his arm banding her waist, his lips brushing the crown of her head. Now she is my life. Gasps echoed through the gathering. Some mouths hung open. Others bowed their heads instinctively, but none dared speak against him. Ilaris trembled, her wolf pressing hard against her chest, but Garrick tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes before all his people. His golden gaze was molten with fire, his words reverent, breaking with devotion. She is no longer the Omega who begged for survival. She is my mate, my queen, my soul. And if any dare deny her, they deny me. His roar shook the stones, his wolf's growl vibrating in every chest, demanding obedience. The crowd fell to their knees, heads bowed. The pack surrendered, not just to their king, but to the woman at his side. Ilaris's tears spilled freely. She had lived in shadow her whole life. Now, beneath the sun and before the world, she was lifted into light. And then Garrick bent, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that silenced the courtyard. It was not polite. It was not ceremonial. It was the same fire that had saved her in the hut, the same storm that had marked her beneath the moon, the same hunger that had turned survival into eternity. Their mouths devoured each other, moans swallowed into groans, passion spilling raw and unashamed before their people. The pack watched, breathless, as their Alpha King and his chosen Omega kissed not as ruler and subject, but as equals, as mates, as a bond, unbreakable. When Garrick finally pulled back, his lips still brushing hers, his voice was hoarse but steady, carrying like a vow across the kingdom. Our reign is sealed, in love, in flesh, in eternity. The crowd erupted into howls, voices rising with the wolves that circled the courtyard, their cries blending into one thunderous song. Ilaris pressed her forehead to his, her tears mingling with her laughter, her heart swelling with a pride she had never dared dream. Then crown me not with gold, she whispered, but with fire. Garrick growled softly, reverent, and kissed her again, deeper, fiercer, as if to carve her words into his soul. And so, before the kingdom, before the moon, before every wolf who bore witness, the Omega who had once been broken became queen. Her crown was not forged of jewels, but of fire of flesh, of the eternal bond she shared with the Alpha King, the Omega's crown. And so, wild hearts, the fragile Omega who entered the forest to die rose as queen beside her Alpha King. Their bond, forged in fire and flesh, will burn eternal, beyond shame, beyond fear, beyond even death itself. If this story ignited something in you, let me know in the comments below. Tell me which moment claimed your heart the most, and also tell me in the comments, if you stood where Alaris did, would you surrender or command? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next tale of forbidden passion and primal love. Until then, may your hearts stay wild and your flames unbroken.